Breaking right now, Thomas Markle Jr., the sister of Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, has lashed out at his sister and her husband, Prince Harry, in the most brutal interview he has ever given.
It's really a little bit disturbing, saying that, she doesn't have a family, she doesn't have a father, and then Harry saying that she has no father now. That's just ridiculous.
I think she's taking advantage of a very weakened man and getting him to say things that you just shouldn't be saying on television.
Meghan Markle is always attempting to, shall we say, build relationships with very, very, very rich men.
Royal family, you should be so thankful this woman wanted to leave, because she's not going to bring any good to the branding of royal. She's going to downgrade it to a level of ghetto, and that's what it is. This is just bad.
August 4th, 40 years ago, Meghan was born, and she was born as a C-section, so she was put in my arm. I was the first person to hold her. Her little hand went around my fingers like that, and I fell in love with her, and I had been that way for 40 years.
Okay. Am I there?
And I really do miss her.
I hope you're having the best birthday you've ever had. Thank you for everything.
Do you still love your daughter?
Of course I do. I love my children. I love my other daughter. I love my son. Of course I love them.
What kicks this whole story off is a heavy wave of silence being broken after years of rumours swirling everywhere. And now Thomas Markle Jr., the estranged brother of Meghan Markle, is stepping forward with what he calls his truth in a way that instantly grabs attention and shakes things up. He's not easing into it either. He's coming in strong with claims that behind all the polished royal headlines and public appearances, there's a deeply emotional and fractured family story that most people never really saw up close.
She doesn't know us. It's just very bizarre how she just basically brushed the entire family under the carpet like we don't exist, and then lied about not having a family and lied about she doesn't have a family that she's always wanted. We've always been here.
Do you think your sister, Meghan Markle, has ruined Prince Harry?
The answer is yes. Every single interview, every single picture, every place they go, Meghan grabs him. Meghan controls him. Meghan tells him no. Meghan stands in front of him. She controls every single situation like she is the star. And she's turned Prince Harry into a man of non-substance, for her own well-being.
According to Thomas, what's being uncovered isn't just gossip or speculation, but a long-running family situation that has been quietly building tension for years, almost like pressure trapped under glass waiting to crack wide open at any moment. He recalls old home videos from a time that now feels distant and almost erased from the public conversation, showing Meghan and their father sharing what he describes as warm, natural, and genuinely close family moments that felt real and unforced at the time. These memories are painted as simple but meaningful snapshots of a different era, when things inside the family reportedly felt more connected and less divided, with laughter, comfort, and everyday bonding that didn't look staged or filtered by fame or pressure. Thomas leans on these memories heavily, suggesting that what once existed has now completely shifted into something unrecognizable, and he treats that contrast like a turning point that changed everything. He claims that those earlier moments stand in sharp opposition to Meghan's current behavior, which he interprets as distance, separation, and emotional cutoff from the family unit they once shared. In his view, this shift isn't small or accidental, it's massive, and he frames it as something close to a betrayal of what used to exist between them.
I do believe Meghan is driving this whole caravan for him. He is so stressed out. You can see it in his face. Despair. He's confused. He thinks he's going to get in trouble if he doesn't say exactly what Meghan says. Very sad to watch.
Yeah, it's incredibly hurtful. I also have always had sympathy with your father because I felt that he was thrown to the wolves. He tried to do the right thing. He came unstuck and they just disowned it. Yeah, actually, it was because of Meghan that it was taken away. Meghan could have had her there if she wanted to have her there. Instead, she wanted to have a bunch of celebrities she barely knew, from the Clooneys to the Beckhams to Elton John to James Gordon to Timbuktu. It looked like anyone she'd met on the party circuit in the previous 2 years got the invite.
Every mention of the past feels loaded with emotion from his perspective, as if he is trying to hold on to a version of the family that no longer exists in the present day. And that emotional weight runs through everything, he says. Before diving deeper into specific allegations, Thomas intensifies his stance even more by delivering what he calls his most brutal interpretation of the situation so far. suggesting that Meghan didn't just change her own life trajectory, but also had a major impact on Prince Harry himself. He doesn't soften the claim at all, instead pushing the idea that Harry has been fundamentally altered in appearance, energy, and behavior since entering Meghan's world, and he describes that change in a way meant to feel unsettling and dramatic. According to Thomas, Harry now appears like a shadow of his former self, someone who has lost the confidence and identity he once carried as a senior royal figure. He paints a picture of Harry walking through life in a drained or detached state, almost like someone trying to adjust to a completely different reality that no longer matches his original role or personality. In Thomas's view, this transformation isn't random at all. It's directly tied to Meghan's influence, which he describes as powerful and all-encompassing in shaping Harry's direction and public presence. But he doesn't stop there.
I knew Meghan for a bit before she met Harry. Did exactly the same to me. She did that to many people that she knew, that she'd either worked with or was friends with or whatever. It just seems to me she's what I would call a ruthless social climber, who just when people are no longer appropriate parts of her circle, they have to be expunged quickly so she can move on up the ladder.
Absolutely.
And I think it was a desperate plea because they've made their bed for the last 6 years and now they're sleeping on them. And the entire world knows exactly what's happening with those two.
Because he escalates the narrative further by attacking Meghan's public persona itself, saying the image the world sees is carefully built and highly controlled. He describes her public identity as graceful, relatable, and compassionate on the surface, but alleges that behind it lies something far more strategic and calculated. According to him, this contrast between public image and private behavior is the core of the conflict he believes is unfolding. He goes as far as calling her a bully in his interpretation, claiming that her personality behind closed doors is very different from how she is presented publicly. Thomas links this to what he describes as a strong sense of self-centered thinking, suggesting she views herself as the central figure in every situation, the one everything revolves around. He emphasizes this idea repeatedly, framing it as if she sees herself not just as part of a story, but as the entire story itself, where everything else exists around her presence. In his version of events, accountability becomes almost impossible in that kind of mindset because there is no space for challenge or correction if someone believes they are always the main authority in every situation. He claims that in such a dynamic, criticism gets ignored or redirected, and any opposition is reframed into something else entirely. He pushes this narrative as part of a bigger explanation for why he believes family relationships deteriorated the way they did. He also brings up Meghan's widely known public background story of rising from modest beginnings into global fame.
Do you have any advice for Harry?
Yeah, stop talking about the royals. Stop giving away all the secrets about the royals. And, love your children and love your wife, but also love your grandmother and love your father.
Suggesting that even that narrative, which many people find inspiring, is something he questions heavily. According to him, that story may not be as clean or straightforward as it appears, and he hints at inconsistencies or exaggerations without going into specific proof, keeping it framed as allegation rather than confirmed fact. From there, the story shifts into even heavier emotional territory. As Thomas suggests, Meghan isn't just reworking her personal image, but actively building a future identity that, in his opinion, was never naturally hers to step into. He connects this idea to royalty and global attention, suggesting she aimed for a position of high influence and visibility that completely reshaped her life path and relationships. He even brings Princess Diana into the discussion, suggesting an alleged aspiration to match or mirror that level of public admiration and legacy. This comparison is framed as part of what he calls a fixation on royal status and public perception, and he ties that directly into tensions he believes exist with Catherine, Princess of Wales, whom he describes as part of a complicated emotional dynamic involving public image, admiration, and comparison. Thomas continues by claiming that this mix of ambition, pressure, and personal traits creates what he sees as ongoing cycles of conflict and emotional tension, where situations are constantly reshaped, reinterpreted, and reframed depending on the narrative. He describes it as a repeating loop, where drama is created, played out, and then redirected, always keeping attention and control within the same orbit of influence. From his perspective, this isn't just about fame or media attention, but about control over personal narrative and how history is written in real time. He suggests that within this framework, relationships outside that narrative become less relevant or even removed entirely if they don't align with the direction being built. He then moves back to Prince Harry, claiming that once Meghan entered the royal environment, everything escalated quickly in terms of tension and emotional strain. He describes a shift in balance within the relationship, saying that Meghan allegedly became the dominant voice in shaping public appearances, decisions, and direction, while Harry's role became more passive in comparison. In his view, this creates what he calls a performance-like dynamic, where one person leads the public-facing identity while the other supports it in the background. He emphasizes this idea by saying it feels more like a structured presentation than an equal partnership, at least from his interpretation of events. Thomas also suggests that this shift has affected Harry's independence, implying that the version of Harry the public once knew has been gradually replaced by someone operating under different influences and priorities. He repeatedly reinforces that this is his interpretation, not a universally accepted fact, but he presents it with strong conviction and emotional weight. He even claims that others within the family, including Thomas Markle Sr., have echoed similar sentiments about Harry appearing changed, describing him as different from the person he once was before joining Meghan in royal life. This is framed as shared concern within parts of the family rather than isolated opinion. The narrative then moves deeper into family conflict, where Thomas claims Meghan's rise to global recognition came with consequences for family relationships, especially around communication and connection. He suggests that contact became limited or cut off over time, leading to feelings of distance and exclusion from major life events. He describes efforts to reconnect or communicate that he says were not answered, framing it as emotional silence that created even more frustration and pain on his side of the family. In his interpretation, this silence becomes symbolic of a larger separation between two versions of the family story, one public and one private. He even references major events like the royal wedding, claiming that parts of the family felt excluded from participation or involvement, which he describes as deeply painful and final in terms of breaking relationships further apart. The emotional intensity increases as Thomas declares that for him, certain relationships are now permanently closed, saying he will not reconnect again, treating it as a final boundary that marks the end of what once existed. He extends his concern further by suggesting that Meghan's approach to relationships could eventually extend to Prince Harry as well, framing it as a cycle that could repeat itself under changing circumstances. He argues that in his view, attachment may be tied to status and position, and if that ever changes, relationships might also shift with it. The story ends on that uneasy note, leaving the idea hanging that identity, power, and public image are all deeply tangled together in this family narrative that continues to evolve with no clear resolution in sight. What makes this next layer of the story hit so hard is how it clashes with the softer, more emotional memories of a family that once looked completely different, almost normal in a way that feels distant now. According to Thomas Markle Jr., there are old family videos that show Meghan in a very different light, moments where she appeared grounded, warm, and deeply connected with her father in a way that seemed natural and unforced. These clips, as described, show a version of life that feels almost frozen in time, like a snapshot of happiness before everything shifted and broke apart in the public eye. He insists that those rare moments aren't just memories, they're proof of a different reality that once existed, where laughter, school events, and simple family pride actually meant something real. One of the most emotional examples mentioned is a school moment where a young Meghan proudly tells her father about an English award, a scene that comes off as innocent, joyful, and deeply human, in contrast to everything that followed. That image alone is used to highlight just how dramatic the shift in family dynamics has become, according to Thomas Jr., and it adds emotional weight to everything he says moving forward, But then he pivots sharply, claiming that the person in those videos no longer exists in the same way today, at least in his view, and he pushes the idea that if Meghan ever attempts to reconnect with their father, it wouldn't come from a place of genuine emotion. Instead, he suggests it would be strategic, calculated, and carefully timed, almost like a public relations move designed to reshape perception rather than rebuild real family bonds. He frames it as something people would eventually see through, describing it as another layer in what he believes is a carefully managed public image. Thomas Jr. doesn't soften his language here at all, and he doubles down on the idea that any future reconciliation attempt would be about optics rather than healing, saying it would be aimed at repairing reputation instead of repairing relationships. He keeps repeating the idea that public perception plays a huge role in everything, and in his view, even emotional moments could be interpreted as part of a broader strategy rather than genuine intent. Then the narrative takes an even more controversial turn as he begins questioning the broader structure of Meghan and Harry's family life, including the most sensitive parts of their private world. These claims are framed as his personal beliefs and opinions, not verified facts, but they still add a heavy layer of tension to the story. He suggests that even their family image as a unit has been shaped and presented in a very controlled way, and he raises questions about authenticity in a way that is meant to provoke strong reactions. One of the most serious points he brings up involves the idea that children in the family dynamic are being used symbolically in ongoing disputes, which he describes as deeply troubling. He paints a picture of emotional distance and fractured communication, suggesting that even the most personal parts of family life have become entangled in public narratives and disagreements. This framing creates a very intense and uncomfortable tone, especially when contrasted with earlier descriptions of warmth and connection. At the same time, the story doesn't rely solely on Thomas Jr.'s perspective, because their father, Thomas Markle Sr., also enters the conversation with his own emotional account of what has happened over the years. His tone is very different, less aggressive and more reflective, focused heavily on loss, silence, and regret rather than accusations or analysis. He describes a complete breakdown in communication, saying that both families feel ghosted, as if they have been cut off entirely from Meghan's life without explanation or resolution. He paints a haunting image of what that silence feels like in everyday terms, describing holidays that used to be filled with family energy, now reduced to emptiness and absence. In his words, the silence doesn't just hurt, it echoes, meaning it continues to affect him over time in a deep and ongoing way. He doesn't frame it as conspiracy or control, but as emotional distance that has become permanent in his experience. Unlike Thomas Jr., who leans into theories of manipulation and image control, Thomas Sr. takes a more vulnerable approach, openly admitting his own mistakes and calling them poor decisions that contributed to the breakdown of the relationship. He doesn't defend himself aggressively, instead acknowledging regret and expressing a desire to fix things if it was still possible. He describes his situation in extremely heavy terms, even comparing it to a kind of emotional sentence where there is no appeal, no reduction, and no clear path back. What makes his perspective especially painful is how personal it becomes when he talks about missing key life moments, especially involving his granddaughter. He expresses a deep emotional fear that he may never get to meet her or be part of her life in any meaningful way. That absence, in his view, is one of the most painful consequences of everything that has happened, because it represents not just a lost relationship, but a lost generation of family connection. He also reflects on a final phone call he had with Meghan from a hospital bed shortly before her royal wedding, describing it as a short and emotionally heavy moment that marked the end of direct communication between them. That memory is described as a turning point, after which contact completely stopped, leaving only silence in its place. From that point forward, he says, there were health struggles, including serious medical issues like a heart attack and stroke, but still no outreach from Meghan, which deepened his sense of isolation. Despite all of this, Thomas Sr. expresses something unexpected. He holds no resentment toward King Charles for walking Meghan down the aisle during the wedding. Instead, he describes it as an act of kindness and duty, acknowledging it as something that filled a role he could not perform himself. That detail adds a layer of emotional complexity showing that even in pain, there is still space for understanding and acceptance in his perspective. Throughout his statements, he repeatedly emphasizes that he is not looking for fame, attention, or public sympathy, but simply a chance to speak to his daughter again and clarify how he is being portrayed. He insists that he feels misrepresented and wants to correct what he sees as a distorted public narrative about who he is and what happened. At the same time, he maintains a consistent boundary, saying he would never show up uninvited or force contact, respecting her space even while feeling excluded from it. One of the most emotional contradictions in his story is that he lives physically close to Meghan's home, yet remains completely cut off from her life. That proximity highlights the emotional distance even more, making the separation feel sharper and more surreal, like two worlds existing side by side without ever intersecting. He describes this as one of the hardest parts of the entire situation because the physical closeness only emphasizes the emotional gap. Even when discussing responsibility, he doesn't fully reject the idea that his actions may have contributed to Meghan's struggles, but he also gently argues that he was always available if she had reached out. That mix of accountability and unresolved pain gives his perspective a more conflicted emotional tone, showing that the situation is not one-sided in his mind, but layered and complicated. At the core of everything he says is a simple message. He still wants reconciliation, forgiveness, and a chance to rebuild even a small part of what was lost. He genuinely believes that communication could still fix things, no matter how much time has passed or how deep the divide has become. But he also speaks with realism, acknowledging that time is moving forward and that opportunities for repair may be slipping away. As the story closes in on its most emotional point, the focus returns to those old home videos again, showing a younger Meghan smiling, engaging, and proudly sharing moments with her father in ways that feel completely different from the present narrative. These clips are described as powerful because they remind everyone that relationships can change dramatically over time, sometimes in ways that are difficult to understand or explain fully. That contrast between past and present becomes the central emotional question of the entire story, leaving viewers to weigh love, mistakes, silence, and distance against each other. It raises difficult questions about whether relationships can survive public pressure, personal decisions, and years of separation, or whether some breaks become permanent no matter how much history exists. And finally, that leaves everything hanging on one lingering question that sits at the heart of this entire situation. Is it possible to rebuild something once it has been completely broken, or does silence eventually become the final answer when words are no longer exchanged? If you found this breakdown interesting and want more deep dives like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss what we uncover next. Drop your thoughts in the comments below because this story definitely divides opinion, and your perspective matters in this ongoing conversation.